the participation or support of a nuclear weapon state should be regarded as a joint attack on the Russian Federation.
Well, that was Russian President Vladimir Putin announcing an update to his nuclear doctrine and issuing a threat to the West. He's lowered the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. They could now be deployed, Putin says, if a nuclear-armed nation supports Ukraine in the use of long-range missiles against Russia. The West has been weighing whether to give Ukraine long-range missiles that could be deployed deep into Russian territory. Putin's clear warning to the West is this could trigger nuclear war. While much of the world's focus has been, understandably, on the deteriorating situation in the Middle East, this now sharpens attention back on what's unfolding in Ukraine. Where does Putin's nuclear warning leave the conflict? Are we at a tipping point moment? And what does it mean for countries like Australia that have supported Ukraine from the get-go? And what happens to Ukraine if Donald Trump returns to the White House? I'm David Speers on Ngunnawal Country at Parliament House in Canberra. Welcome to Insiders on Background. Well, Vasyl Myroschnychenko is Ukraine's ambassador to Australia. He joins me now. Very good to see you again, Ambassador. Thanks for
having me.
So let's start with what we've heard from Vladimir Putin overnight, lowering that threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. How seriously do you take this? What do you make of this warning?
In 1994, Ukraine gave up the second largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world. And that was as part of the arrangement which was done with a number of countries. And in exchange for making the biggest contribution to the global peace, Ukraine got security guarantees that nobody would ever threaten to use nuclear weapons against its territorial integrity and sovereignty of the country. And now Russia, for the past 2.5 years, actually for the past 10 years, have been using nuclear to threaten Ukraine, to threaten and intimidate the countries which are supporting the country. And every time we see he's using the same card when there is a weakness. Because the fact that Russia's defense in Kursk was so poor shows that Putin is less concerned about defending his own country, but more concerned about killing Ukrainians with missiles.
He has used this nuclear threat, as you say, this card previously, but it's been a while. Do you take this any more seriously than those previous threats, or are you suggesting this is just bluster once again?
Of course, nuclear threats should be taken seriously, but we've seen that the red lines have been crossed a number of times, and they've been mostly a bluff in case of Russia. I think India and China made it very clear to Russia that they would not tolerate the use of nuclear weapons. And definitely our ability to hit some of the depots deep inside Russia have demonstrated that we can inflict serious damage. Of course, Russian aircraft, they just go up in the airfields, and they just shoot. And they shoot all over Ukraine, hammering the country. Just more recently, a city of Lviv, just 70 kilometers from Poland's border, a family of 4 people died. A man lost his 3 daughters and his wife, which, in Lviv, just 70 kilometers from a NATO border. And it was considered to be the safest city. And now, is there any kind of justification that we cannot hit the airfield where that aircraft was that, went on air and sent a cruise missile to kill that family?
So this is where the question comes in. Why does Ukraine need these long-range missiles to strike into Russian territory?
We need to target legitimate military threats. The right for self-defense. This includes the military bases, airfields, the strategic bombers that Russians are using against us, and that would really help us achieve a turning point.
And where are they? Where are they?
A lot of them are still, in Western Russia, closer to the Ukrainian border, and that would be a game changer for us.
So you can't hit those at the moment.
We can hit it with our own drones that we have developed, and we've seen some success recently.
The long-range missiles would be far more effective.
They would be much more effective, that's for sure. And at the end of the day, we see that Russia and Putin's regime is getting weak. And we sense it. And what is important, and this is what President Zelensky has, he made a plea to the international community. He's delivered several speeches at the UN during General Assembly. He made it very clear that we now need to, that concerted action and effort to put more pressure on
So your
Putin.
message to the UK, to the Europeans, to the US, all considering this request from Ukraine for long-range missiles, ignore Putin's threat about nuclear weapons. we need those long-range missiles?
Ukraine needs to be able to defend itself, right? And it's a legitimate right as part of the self-defense to be able to hit the military targets within Russia.
Okay.
It could be achieved different ways, and of course, long-range missiles are one of the options. Now we see how drones are changing the whole dynamics. So of course, having thousands and thousands of those drones which could be deployed could also make a game changer. It just equipping Ukraine with the right tools to do it. At the end of the day, a lot depends on air defense, and we see that as Russians are now trying to subdue Ukrainians by attacking our energy system. They're already using nuclear blackmailing by having the largest nuclear power plant in Europe as a hostage. They keep that in Zaporizhzhia. Now, more recently, we learned from the intelligence that they will hit 3 other power nuclear stations which are currently operating. Imagine that 80% of power generation in Australia is gone. How would Australia survive?
Well, this comes to what pressure Russia is applying on Ukraine. I mean, as you point out, Ukraine surprised the world, really, back in August when it seized a section of Russian territory. But in the east of Ukraine, is Russia continuing to make gains? Is Ukraine continuing to lose ground?
Russians are making some gains. I have to say, I mean, it's the fact. Nevertheless, we are holding ground where we can. But of course, I mean, a lot of the equipment that's been committed in Ukraine has not yet arrived.
But is Ukraine's presence in Russian territory stretching your resources too far? Has that been a successful move, or is it creating problems elsewhere?
Look, I mean, it has really changed the game in a way, and it really caught Russians by surprise and demonstrated that basically, that Putin was not prepared for that, and that really has had a major impact on his rule within his own country. Because once you got the war on your territory, it's a different story.
And
right?
I think that's part of the reason why he's talking about nuclear weapons
yes,
now.
and now, of course, that whole story was suppressed in the Russian media. They didn't even talk about it. It was just really like, oh, something's going on, everything is under control, but it's not. And it's really, we are at that moment when we have to maintain that level of pressure on Russia as a collective, world, basically, because at the end of the day, it's all about the UN Charter. It's all about the major principles which are out there, which Russia has so blatantly violated.
So to that end, the US overnight has announced a further $550 million Australian in its latest tranche of support for Ukraine. The European Union has committed to what is a loan facility for the coming year of around $65 billion Australian, I think it is, or 50 billion euros. Is that going to be enough?
The costs of war are huge, and the needs are there on the military side. The needs are there on the humanitarian side. We see Russians destroying our hospitals, our schools, our infrastructure, and at the end of the day, it's our ability to have a proper air defense against those incessant attacks from Russia. It's what is important, that the support that is coming, that is consistent. And it is at the right time that can actually help Ukraine defend herself in this brutal war. At the end of the day, Russia understands strengths. I mean, and this is a key message that sometimes is being missed. And when they see the strengths, especially when they see a strength from a coalition of countries, I mean, this is when they would react.
So you need the air defence, you've explained, the missiles to be able to hit Russian military bases across the border. Do you need tanks? This is where Australia comes in, because right now Australia is weighing up these Abrams tanks that we're replacing with newer tanks, and whether to give them, about 59 of them, I think, to Ukraine. Why do you need them?
Well, it's certainly up to the Australian government to decide if they can provide those tanks. But I would like to note that we already been using those tanks in Ukraine.
From the Americans?
From the Americans.
Right.
They've been supplied previously.
So what are they being used for?
They've been used for different operations which have been conducted in Ukraine, either on defense or on the counteroffensive, basically, in different parts of the front line.
Were they used to go into the Russian territory that you talked about?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right.
And at the end of the day, it provides some additional protection. It's better to have tanks than not to have tanks, especially in these circumstances. Often even some of the Bushmasters were used even as tanks, so they are not. They're just protected vehicles for the transport.
So these Abrams tanks, if Australia does agree to give them, would go into trying to push those Russian forces out of Ukrainian territory.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't want any of the Russian territory. You have to understand. We want Russians out of Ukraine, and this is our primary goal. And
so that section of Russian territory is just a bargaining chip.
It's a bargaining chip, pretty much, and just demonstrating and bringing war to Russia and changing the whole dynamics of the conflict. But at the end of the day, we don't want any of the Russian territory. We want Russians out. So the needs, for tanks or protected vehicles or ammunition. I mean, and so far the support of the Australian government has been great. What we are hoping for is for Australian government to continue supporting Ukraine because it's in your strategic interests. It's in your strategic interests making sure that Russia fails in Ukraine. I think that will be the best deterrence for any autocratic leader here in the Indo-Pacific, that they cannot use force to change borders. Because if Russia is successful, it will embolden them. And this will really undermine your security here and the security of the smaller nations in the region, which feel so coerced by bigger powers.
Like China? Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, we're talking, for instance, it could be North Korea, for instance, or it could be other countries, right? I mean, they are really watching and monitoring what is happening on the ground. And if Russia can get away with such a blatant violation of international law, and they can, end up with a piece of land that they grabbed in Ukraine, I mean, that would be a serious issue for the region.
So do you think you'll get these Abrams tanks from Australia? What are you hearing?
I have to be optimistic, In my job, what I've learned, you have to be positive and optimistic because you can't win the war being a pessimist, right? So I really believe in for the right to win over the evil. I mean, and that would be my hope that support will come one way or another.
Australia has now provided, I think it's $1.3 billion in total support to Ukraine. It says the Australian government says it's still the largest non-NATO contributor. Is that correct?
It is one of the largest non-NATO military contributor, and this is kind of a very important caveat.
Is that where we lose the distinction?
Yeah, this is because in total it's not, but if you add military, I mean, basically, yes, it is one of the largest.
Because of the Bushmasters and other military equipment.
Exactly.
Right. But not financially.
Not financially, because there are other countries who have contributed much more, and they're already 6 or 7 ahead of Australia.
6 or 7. Should we be contributing more financially?
Look, it's up to the government to decide if they can do more. But at the end of the day, I was just in Ukraine recently, and I met many Ukrainians, and everybody told me, look, Vasyl, when you go back, please make sure you thank Australian government and Australian people for their support. How grateful they are that the country 15,000 kilometers away feel the pain of the Ukrainians, and they are out there supporting us, sending Bushmasters, sending ammunition, sending drones. We will need your help with demining the country and join the demining coalition. 25% of Ukrainian territory is mined, right? We'll need your help with reconstruction and recovery. By the way, just overnight, there was a G7 declaration on recovery and reconstruction. 30 countries already signed up. It's open. I hope Australia will be able to consider and signing up to that.
So we still haven't signed up to that.
Oh, it's just brand new. I mean, this has just happened as we speak. Basically,
we'll follow that up. That's obviously going to cost a lot of money, and that's where the financial support comes in. Your president, Vladimir Zelensky, he's been at the UN in New York. He's referred there to his victory plan, without giving too many details. What is the victory plan?
I think the victory plan is very simple. I mean, it includes security guarantees for Ukraine. It's making sure that Russia cannot invade us in the future. What happened in the past, that the reaction to the Russian aggression was very weak. When Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, and then Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, the reaction was weak. And this is what emboldened Putin for the major aggression in 2022. And this is where I think lessons should be learned. At the end of the day, it's strong Ukraine, which has security guarantees, will actually stop this war.
Does that mean Ukraine being part of NATO?
That would be the best security guarantee Ukraine can get, actually. We all in Ukraine, it's supported by the majority of the population. It's our sovereign choice.
But that's the one thing that Putin won't cop?
Well, Putin has claimed that, but it's just a bluff, because Finland and Sweden joined NATO, And according to the Putin's logic, he should have invaded those countries before they joined NATO. He had a year to do that. He didn't. So his idea was pretty much an imperialistic conquest that he, done in Ukraine by basically trying to colonize the country. David, you have to remember what's happening in the occupied territories, because this is very important. People in the occupied territories, elites are killed, their children are deported to Russia, others are exposed to infiltration camps, torture, rape, they force them to become Russian citizens because they cannot do anything there. Russians, they are burning Ukrainian books in schools. This is kind of like we are seeing like from the World War II. This is what is happening in the occupied territories. And we can learn about that only once we have liberated those territories. And there's so much more which we are not aware of. So the level of this war and the destruction it is bringing, it is difficult to imagine what is happening. So President Zelensky announced a peace plan that he's working on. And that peace plan is based on the UN Charter, all the principles of the UN Charter. And that was his plea in the UN yesterday, where he called on the countries to help us do it. We already have about 100 countries and international organizations who have signed up, and I'm very thankful that Australia participated in the first summit. There will be another one, right? And we need more countries out there. He had a separate meeting with the president of India. He just met the president of South Africa. We're also hoping for China and Brazil to get involved in this, because at the end of the day, we want the world to get back to normal. And the only way how we can achieve that for this war to end, it will not just fade away on its own. There must be action. And this is the action and determination that Zelensky is asking for from the global community.
Well, the one person and significant person who does not seem to be on board and who won't be meeting President Zelensky while he's in the US is, of course, Donald Trump, the former president, the Republican nominee. Republican leaders in Congress are also refusing to meet with President Zelensky as well. Donald Trump said overnight, I think it was, "We continue to give billions of dollars to a man who refused to make a deal, Zelensky." How worried are you about the Republicans winning in November, and what would this mean for Ukraine?
Ukraine's victory is not in the interests of any particular party in the U.S. It's in the national interests of the United States. And we are very grateful for the support we've been able to get from both parties in the U.S. The big package.
But there's not much support from Trump and increasingly the Republicans.
Well, the Republicans have supported the big package of assistance, which was voted, earlier this year, which of $60 billion of assistance to Ukraine.
Is that support cooling, though, as the election draws nearer and Trump's and J.D. Vance's position becomes very clear?
You have to understand. I mean, it's a political campaign at the moment. It's extremely heated, as in many other countries, right? When it becomes, this is election period of time, and there could be different statements, different announcements made.
Do you think he'd do something different if he actually wins?
But at the end of the day, Republicans traditionally have been supporting Ukraine, and we hope that it doesn't matter who wins these elections, the support will continue. Of course, we are concerned. What we are concerned about is about unpredictability.
Well, Donald Trump says, he said it repeatedly, that if he wins, he will end this war before he actually takes office. He wants a deal done. Does that mean Ukraine giving up the territory that the Russians currently hold?
We still don't understand what exactly he has in mind for that, and how he can negotiate with Putin and achieve a deal, right? I mean, this is still unclear. And again, this is part of the political campaigning which is happening, and we have to keep this in mind when we are interpreting any of the actions or not actions which will be following.
But if it turns out to be more than political campaigning, and the US under Donald Trump, if he wins, withdraws support, what happens?
Look, I will just use this opportunity to remind you about the time when Donald Trump was the president first time. And when he was first time, he actually authorized the sale of javelins to Ukraine, which are anti-tank missiles, which really have played a major role in fending off the attack of the Russian tanks in 2022. We couldn't get them under the previous administration, but got them under Trump. He imposed sanctions on the Nord Stream 2, and which was a major gas line from Russia to Europe. He also supported the Crimea Declaration, which was a political document, basically confirming that nobody will ever recognize Crimea as part of Russia. So this has happened under his watch when he was the president, and he supported those decisions. So look, we have to just wait until the elections and see how it goes. I'm convinced that the support of American people for Ukraine will remain, and it will influence and shape the policy of whoever is going to be in the administration.
Well, as you say, you have to remain optimistic. Vasyl Myroschnychenko, Ukraine's ambassador to Australia, thanks very much for joining us. Good to catch up with you.
Thanks for having me.
And if you've got any thoughts on this conversation or ideas for the podcast, do drop us a line, insiders@abc.net.au. We'll see you Sunday morning. Bye for now.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.